Picture this. You're standing inside a sandstone courtyard at the heart of the Sasanian Empire. The year is 378. The air is thick with desert heat and perfume, but the stillness around you is unnatural. Beneath latticed screens and beneath the polished marble, something is happening that you are not supposed to see. Torches flicker inside a windowless chamber at the palace core. The floor is red, not from carpet, but from blood. In the center lies a silver basin, shallow, ceremonial, and above it, bound at the knees and elbows, is a boy no older than 17. He does not move. His eyes are open. His chest barely rises. Just beyond him, a man stands in silence, wearing gold-threaded robes and a circlet of lapis at his brow. His beard is thin, graying. His fingers tremble, though he tries to hide it beneath practiced stillness. He is Shapur, king of Kingsongs, chosen of Ahura Mazda. He believes this blood, warm and unspoiled, will preserve him. That youth can be drawn not just from spring water and saffron, but from a still living body. Before we move further into this ritual of silence and control, if you are someone who values the forgotten layers of history, the dark truths beneath empire and religion, consider staying close. These stories are not comfortable, but they are real. Let me know where you're listening from. Together across time, we'll breathe the same heavy air. This isn't just a tale about barbaric ritual. It's a story about the fear of decay, of how absolute power tries to wrestle with the one thing it cannot defeat, death. According to Persian scholars, Shapur was once a reformer. He lowered grain levies, expanded trade routes, even tried to introduce protections for laborers in the textile provinces. But his reforms carried a shadow. They were not rooted in justice, but in optics, in the perfection of the crown's image. He wanted to be remembered as both lion and god. When he began to age, that image cracked. The scrolls speak little of what happened to Shapur after his 60th year, but archaeological findings suggest a sudden transformation in court ritual. Several medical chambers were sealed. Burial grounds for eunuchs multiplied around the capital, and in the center of the palace complex, a new chamber was built. Octagonal, sealed with polished silver tiles, and equipped with internal drainage. It was Ardashir, one of the king's most trusted servants, who first witnessed what happened inside. He had served since boyhood. Born of a concubine and a merchant's son, he had been given over to the royal house in exchange for debt forgiveness. Castrated before adolescence, educated within the whispering stone halls of the temple school, he had learned to walk without sound and wait without expression. Shapur saw in him the perfect attendant, quiet, clean, lacking threat or desire. And so, when the king's decline began, when his skin sagged, when his limbs trembled, when his nights were sleepless, it was Ardashir who remained at his side, silent, devoted, watching. At first, it was herbs, then oils, then the milk of wild mares mixed with saffron, then wine infused with bits of crushed coral and pearls. Nothing helped. The king's bones ached. His hands would not hold the stylus. His teeth began to blacken. Then came the doctrine. It arrived from a temple priest, a whisper traced through Zoroastrian texts that the essence of the soul resides in blood not corrupted by lust or ambition. That eunuchs, being free of passion, held the purest essence of all. According to some scholars, this belief was not widely accepted, but in a court ruled by fear and divine command, acceptance did not matter. Ritual became law, and law became silence. The first offering was framed as a sacrifice, a holy gift. But the selection was quiet, no families consulted, no names recorded. The boy was taken before dawn. He did not return. When the king emerged later that day, those present claimed his eyes were brighter, that he stood taller, that he smiled. Whether any of it was true is irrelevant. The story had begun, and Ardashir, though he said nothing, began to understand that survival required more than obedience. It would require invisibility. The basin was emptied before sunrise. Slaves scrubbed the floor in silence. No words were exchanged, nothing written. The boy's body, wrapped in linen and covered with rose ash, was taken to the lower necropolis and buried without markers. Within hours, the room had been relit and sanctified. By noon, another had been chosen. Experts believe the chamber was designed with acoustics in mind, that its octagonal shape muffled sound while keeping the air moving evenly. This was not an accident. According to architectural historians, spaces used for royal purification rites often blurred the line between religious function and personal theater. But in this case, the performance had no audience. There were only two roles, the aging king and the sacrificed. Over the next few months, it became routine. The selected youths were always under 20, always eunuchs, always drawn from the lowest echelons of the palace. Scribes, apprentices, singers, pages. The criteria were unspoken but clear, silent, unremarkable, untouched by court scandal. Their disappearances were never questioned. Official records listed them as reassigned or ill. Some were simply erased. It was Ardashir who prepared them. He was the one who entered their chambers in the blue hours before dawn, touched their shoulders gently, and told them to rise. His voice, when he used it, was low and kind. His hands were steady, and he never lied. He never told them they would return. He never promised it would be painless. He only said, "It is time." For many, he was the last face they saw. What is the cost of becoming the instrument of another's madness? Ardashir did not resist. He did not run. He did not plead with the king, nor hide the boys. He did as he was told. He ensured the process remained clean, sacred, efficient. And in doing so, he became a ghost to himself. Mehrunes, the royal physician, watched from further away. He was not a priest nor a true believer. He had been trained in Alexandria, a man of science, method, record-keeping. He had written once on surgical remedies for scorpion sting. He had measured lung capacity using bellows and parchment. But none of that mattered now. His role had shifted. He was no longer a healer. He had become something else. He did not perform the bloodletting, but he oversaw it, calculated it, measured the volumes, tracked the effects. He observed the king's eyes for brightness, his pulse for strength. It became clear to him, after the fourth or fifth sacrifice, that nothing was changing. The king was not rejuvenated. His decline merely slowed. Or perhaps the illusion deepened. And still Mehrunes said nothing. He began to drink at night, not for pleasure, but to dull the clarity. He tore pages from his own notebooks, burned them, erased measurements, but he remained. Like Ardashir, he found himself caught in a web where resistance was not punished. It was simply made invisible. It is easy to judge these men from the safety of distance. But history, as one scholar writes, is not a ledger of heroes and villains. It is a map of compromises, of men who chose silence because they knew the walls had ears, of men who lit the torches that illuminated the basin but never looked directly into it. And Shapur? He began to sleep again. He ate more. His voice regained a fragment of its old resonance. He walked the garden once more, slowly with two guards on either side. And when courtiers bowed, he met their eyes. This was not health. It was triumph. He believed he had broken the bodies of rebellion. But the rebellion was only beginning. And it would come not from warriors or priests or foreign empires. It would come from inside the palace, from hands that trembled, from voices that did not speak, from those who had watched too long. By the time the seventh eunuch was led into the ritual chamber, Ardashir's steps no longer faltered. He had learned which corridors echoed, which doors needed a second push, which boys might try to resist, not by screaming but by hesitation, by turning their faces toward the rising sun as if hoping it might hold them back. He no longer met their eyes. He had become what the king needed most. Not a man, but a function. A hand that did not shake. A presence that did not question. When he washed the king's face afterward with lemon water, he did so with the care of a son dressing his father's wounds. But his gaze slid across the king's eyes like water on polished stone. There was nothing left to exchange. Historians believe that by the end of that year, the court had begun to fragment. Not openly, that would have been unthinkable, but at the edges. Meals grew quieter. Ministers spoke more through intermediaries. Letters were passed without seals. The firewood brought to the king's chamber was checked twice for ash and snakeskin. One astrologer fled the palace after offering an ambiguous omen. He was found 3 days later, face down in a dry well. The king himself was rarely seen in daylight. He emerged only after dusk, veiled, perfumed, escorted by men in dyed black robes. He walked among incense and silence. Rumors spread that he no longer aged, that he drank water infused with gold dust, that he had spoken to the fire itself and been promised another 30 years. But Mehrunes saw the truth. The king's teeth were crumbling. His spine had begun to twist. He moved as if his joints were glass wrapped in flesh. The brightness in his eyes, the so-called sign of divine favor, was not strength. It was fever. His blood thickened, his skin sagged, even under the oil and silk. Still, the sacrifices continued. According to preserved physician records found near Ctesiphon, the average life expectancy of palace eunuchs dropped by nearly half during this period. The records do not say why, but those who study power know what cannot be said is often most telling. And then came the eighth boy. He was younger than the others, no more than 12, with thin wrists and a face like a carved almond. He had been mute since birth, a fact that appealed to the priest who nominated him. Purity, he said, is deepest in those who carry no words. When Ardashir came for him, the boy did not flinch. He stood, walked, took Ardashir's hand. There was no struggle, no confusion, only the quiet understanding of someone who had lived his entire short life in the shadow of other people's hunger. That night, Ardashir did not sleep. He went to Mehrunes. They did not speak. They simply sat. The physician poured bitter liquor into a bowl and passed it across. In the shadows, two men who had served the same king for decades and whose hands had never once touched outside of ritual, now sat shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same air, carrying the same shame. They did not plan anything. They were too tired, but something in them began to shift. Not rebellion, not clarity. Something simpler. A refusal. The ninth offering was delayed. No official reason was given. The priest who typically selected candidates cited unfavorable alignment of stars. The chamber remained dark for nearly a week. The servants who usually lit the lamps were reassigned. The basin stayed dry. It was the first break in the rhythm since the rite began. Ardashir used the time to disappear. Not from the palace, that was impossible, but from his own body. He walked slower. He ate less. He moved through his duties like smoke moves through a ruined room, without resistance, without shape. When he washed the king's hands, he did not notice the tremor. When he knelt to refill the incense burner, he no longer held his breath. He had become a shadow within a ritual that was starting to hollow itself out. Mehrunes, meanwhile, began recording again. Not in official ledgers, those had long been reduced to fabrications and fables, but in scraps of papyrus hidden inside his satchel. He wrote without dates, without names, just observations, flesh tone, pupil dilation, time to unconsciousness. He noted changes in the king's skin, dryness, yellowing at the temples. He tracked the appearance of sores beneath the robes. He saw a man in the final stages of collapse, and still no one spoke of stopping, because it had become sacred. That's how it happens. At a certain point, violence ritualizes itself. It gathers inertia. The rite no longer needs a reason. It becomes its own justification. What began as desperation calcifies into belief. Not because it works, but because it must. The ninth boy was brought in the following week, older, nearly a man. His eyes were sharp, alert. He struggled when they bound his hands. He bit one of the guards. He spat blood on the floor. And when Ardashir entered the chamber, the boy locked eyes with him and refused to look away. The basin had been polished. The silver caught the torchlight. Ardashir stepped forward, as always, holding the vessel of heated balm. He froze. The boy's chest rose and fell in uneven bursts. His lip bled. He was panting, not with fear, but rage. And something in Ardashir broke. The balm slipped from his hand. It shattered, ceramic shards scattering across the stone floor, steam curling into the air. The sound rang out like a struck bell. Guards stepped forward. The priest barked something, but Ardashir did not move. He looked at the king, not at his feet, not at his hands, but directly into the hollowed eyes of a man who had drunk too much silence. The room paused. Shapur blinked. His mouth moved, but no words came. According to one of Mehrunes' later notes, this was the exact moment the physician stepped forward. He placed himself between the king and the boy. He did not draw a blade. He did not raise a hand. He only said as softly, clearly, "No more, children." We do not know what was said next, but the ritual chamber was sealed that night, and it was never opened again. The palace did not react immediately. There were no arrests, no punishments, no proclamations of betrayal. The basin remained, but its silver dulled. The torches in the ritual hall went unlit. For days, then weeks, the building seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting to see which part of itself would move first. Outside the court, no one knew what had changed. The priests still sang at dawn, the guards still saluted, the scribes still copied laws that would never be read. But inside, something subtle had shifted. A line had been crossed, one buzz. Not loudly, not in fire, but in refusal. The boy, the ninth offering, disappeared. Not in the way the others had. He was not buried. He was not mourned. He was simply gone. Whether spared or silenced, history does not record, and that silence itself may be the last violence done to him. Ardashir was reassigned to the kitchens, not punished, but removed, stripped of ceremonial duties. He no longer touched the king's robes or poured sacred oils. He peeled fruit in a windowless room, his fingers cut raw from pomegranate rind in wet knives. He accepted this without resistance. It was, in some way, the only escape allowed. Mehrunes remained. He continued to tend to the king's health, though health had long since become fiction. The body he cared for was a ruin. Bones shifted beneath the skin like loose tiles beneath mud. The king's breath wheezed at night, irregular and wet. His eyes dimmed. His veins turned dark under the parchment of his flesh. And yet he smiled. He believed, truly, fully deep, that he had been purified. It is difficult to explain the kind of madness that wraps itself in silken prayer. According to modern historians, rulers in late-stage theocratic courts often construct closed mythologies, not merely believing lies, but feeding on them, needing them, as the body needs salt. The sacrifices had not healed him, but they had become his proof that healing was possible. To abandon them now would be to admit that he had failed not only in body, but in spirit, and so he refused. He asked no questions about the sealed chamber. He did not speak Ardashir's name again. He ignored Mehrunes' prescriptions. He continued to breathe, but the court began to empty. One minister left for the western provinces to oversee repairs. Another took pilgrimage to Yazd and did not return. A priest vanished after a sermon in which he mentioned rot in the heart of trees. Servants moved slower. The corridors rang less with footsteps, more with dust. And the king, still alive, began to speak to shadows. Witnesses, a handful of guards, and a surviving laundry girl, would later say he could be heard at night murmuring to the walls. He named the boys, not in accusation, not in regret, but as if recounting a lineage, a litany of lost purity. Ardashir, in the kitchens, did not listen. He sliced figs until his nails blackened, then soaked them in vinegar. He spoke to no one. He had nothing left to say. But something was growing in the silence. Not revolution, not redemption, something quieter. Rot, not moral, not divine, just human. The rot did not begin in the bones. It began in the air. The scent of frankincense could no longer mask it. Beneath the perfumes and oils, a sourness crept into the king's chambers. The smell of still water, of damp cloth left too long in shadow. Servants changed the linens 3 times daily. Attendants washed the walls with lemon pulp and ash, but nothing held. It was the smell of a man decaying while still alive. Shapur's skin broke in places, not in wounds, but in weeping fissures along the arms and neck, as though the body itself had tired of holding him together. He refused ointments. He believed the sores were a trial, that to heal would be to fail the gods who had granted him ritual. He allowed only Mehrunes to touch him, and even then only under the moon's eye. Mehrunes continued, not because he believed, but because he had passed the threshold beyond belief and disbelief. He operated now on habit, like a tendon responding to an old nerve. He wrote nothing. He had burned the last of his notes. Some nights, he would sit by the king's bed and place his hand near the old man's throat, not touching, only sensing. Counting how many shallow rises remained between dusk and dawn, he no longer prayed. There were no gods left in this palace, only rituals with no meaning and wounds that did not close. And then came the vision. That was the word the king used. He summoned Mehrunes at midnight, voice hoarse and lips cracked. He said he had seen the temple of fire in the dreamscape, that the blood of the boys had been accepted, that he had been made clean, that the flame had spoken. He wanted one more offering, just one. This time, not from the household staff, not from the temple, not from among the mute and the faceless. He wanted Ardashir, the man who had stood beside him, who had touched his skin with sacred balm, who had been silent not because he was empty, but because he had once loved. The court did not question. Orders were given, slow and ceremonial. Guards were sent. Records were prepared. Even the basin was uncovered and polished, as though the last months had not passed. But Ardashir did not resist. He left the kitchens, washed his hands, combed his hair. He wore the same robe he had worn when he first entered the palace as a boy, threadbare now, the edges fraying but still the color of salt. He did not speak during the procession. The guards flanked him, but not closely. They feared the quiet that clung to him like a second skin. The king waited in the chamber, seated beside the basin, breathing shallowly, his body swathed in linen and warmth as if already embalmed. He raised his hand, a signal. The guards stepped back. Ardashir entered alone, and for the first time in over 30 years of service, he looked not at the floor, not at the ceiling, not through the man, but directly at him. The two of them stood still, one on the edge of the grave, the other already inside it. No one knows what passed between them in that final moment. There were no witnesses, no scribes, no surviving notes, only the sound of metal falling, and a scream, not of pain, but something stranger. A sound like the collapse of belief. They found the king on the stone floor. The basin had tipped. The silver rim was dented. No blood was spilled. Ardashir was gone. The guards searched the palace. Every chamber, every corridor. They lifted floor slats and emptied grain sacks. They questioned cooks and courtiers, beat servants and scribes. But no one had seen him leave. No one had seen him fall. It was as if he had vanished into the stone itself. What the king said in the hours that followed has not been preserved. Only that he spoke and would not stop. He called for Ardashir by name, again and again, louder each time, until his voice cracked and his chest rattled with each breath. He wept, but not like a man mourning a servant, like a man mourning a mirror, a reflection that had refused to stay still. Within 3 days, his eyes filmed over. He could no longer see, his joints locked. The priest brought warmed wine and whispered verses, but he lashed out, striking the nearest attendant with enough force to break bone. He accused them all of betrayal, of cowardice, of impurity. Then he fell silent. He died that night or the next. Reports differ. Some say it was just past midnight. Others claim he had already been dead for a day, but no one dared check. The rituals that followed were hurried. His body was wrapped in layers of silk and rosewater cloth. His coffin was carved from cedar and lined with lapis. A ceremony was held, brief, forced. The court recited the names of his victories, not his rights. No mention was made of the chamber, or the boisaz, or the basin. The chamber was sealed, not with prayer, but with iron. Mehrunes disappeared soon after. Some say he took poison. Others that he crossed the Tigris and entered the desert, seeking the monastery at the edge of the salt plains. One record, found centuries later in a ruined outpost, includes a passage written in his hand, or something believed to be his hand. I did not heal. I witnessed. That was the true sickness. But like so many truths, that record has been questioned. Perhaps he wrote it, perhaps not. The only thing we know for certain is that by the end of that year, the court had changed. The rites were abandoned, the priesthood reshuffled. A new king was crowned, younger, softer in tone, less obsessed with immortality. But the palace never fully recovered. The silver chamber remained sealed. No one entered, no one tried. Not because they forgot, but because they remembered too well. The story of Shapur II and the blood rites is rarely taught. You will not find it in most textbooks. It exists only in fragments. A line in a scroll here, a footnote in a court ledger there, the scarred corner of a burial register. Most references do not name the boys. Some do not even confirm the chamber. It was written over, like so many violences that do not serve the myths of empires. But historians, the quiet ones, remember, they speak not of monsters, but of patterns, of how fear becomes law, how loneliness becomes religion, how men who cannot bear their own mortality will destroy others to feel eternal. Shapur was not the first, he was not the last. The basin, they say, still exists, buried beneath layers of stone and ash, somewhere near the heart of what was once a capital. Its surface is tarnished, the silver flaking, but it holds no blood now, only memory, And in that memory, the boys breathe still. So when we tell stories like these, it is not to condemn alone. It is to remind that beneath every crown lies a man, and beneath every myth, a wound.